And here we go. Okay, here we go. It is now recording. Okay, so you were going to explain your concept, why you think that biology does not depend on culture and society, or that society and culture do not affect biology. That was something...
Yeah. So at the time where I was making a response to you 2 weeks ago, I had a conception of the direction of things in the universe within a theory of biology as being omnidirectional, where... So if you're just taking... if you're just having a conception of the world as being the product of physics, then there's no, you can't say all the forces in the universe are omnidirectional. They're all affecting each other and then reacting to each other, and then you're never going to find causality. But so instead, my conception for biology was that cause was omnidirectional, coming from the genes, and in the intervening time, that view's been challenged for me. I don't think it's correct anymore.
Okay. Yeah, that didn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, even you could say that there are layers of description, right? Like physics is a layer below biology.
Yeah.
So that you may not be able to descriptively reduce biology to physics, but it causally reduces, in the sense that biology is causally determined by physics. But biology, we still need, the descriptive layer of biology, because we can't conceptually reduce it to physics, even if we believe that it causally is determined by it. But still, you wouldn't say that biology doesn't affect the physical world, right? Because obviously there's oxygen in the atmosphere, and that's because of biology, right? So it's kind of like that with society and culture, except not exactly, because it's not the same. It's not like society and culture... Well, they're different things from biology. You could say that society is sort of composed of individuals. I wouldn't say that's entirely true, but you could say that. And in that case, I guess it's a little bit like the relation between biology and physics. There are definitely other layers of description, but certainly the nature of a society affects biology, and culture affects biology. What we eat is culture. The use of fire is culture. And so I think now you sort of agree, I guess. We're not really debating it, but I just, when you said that, it didn't make any sense, so.
Yeah. So I think we might agree on a macro level, but the model, so we might have very different models, and that could be interesting. So for me, biology is physics with the assumption that there are replicator phenomena within the universe, and these replicator phenomena are primarily, they're doing two things. They're printing themselves, so they print another copy of themselves with some degree of variation, and then they also print stuff into the universe. And so 2 weeks ago, my conception was that this was omnidirectional, that a replicator was something that printed a copy of itself and also printed other phenomena into the universe. We've got an echo.
Oh, you're getting an echo? Sorry, I'll mute.
Yeah, so a replicator was something that printed itself and printed stuff into the universe. So a replicator might print hands onto a human, that sort of thing. So that part of the phenotype is informationally caused by the replicator. But there's a problem with this conception in that, most fundamentally, there's DNA, and particularly the DNA replicase gene, which directs the printing of a DNA replicase protein complex, and then that protein complex then reprints the gene.
Yeah,
but,
can I just jump in? I mean, you can't
go for it.
consider DNA to be a replicator exactly, right? the replicating machine is the organism. What it replicates is basically the phenotype, more or less. I mean, it takes information that is stored in DNA to some extent, but also in other aspects of the organism, and then it propagates the information, right? So it propagates information, and it replicates the form of the organism. But it's not like, I mean, DNA is not a replicator. DNA is just a molecule that, like as you were saying, obviously it requires proteins and so on to, copy it or to cause it to be expressed in the phenotype. And like the DNA doesn't print the hand, right? The hand grows. And it's part of the phenotype and it's part of the replicating machinery, right? Without the hand, it's harder to reproduce, right? So,
well, in some environments, the DNA prints the hand, and in other environments, the DNA doesn't print the hand. So, if DNA finds itself in a human egg inside a womb, it'll eventually print the hand. But if the DNA finds itself floating in the vacuum of space, it won't print the hand.
Well, but I just think the metaphor of the DNA printing the hand is misleading. I think, cells replicate and they produce a hand because, the DNA is switching on and off certain enzymes, or it's causing cells, basically it's causing cells to differentiate in different ways, right? That's how you go from a single fertilized egg to a complex life form. But I don't know. I'm just saying the metaphor, like thinking about it as the DNA is printing stuff, that metaphor seems a bit iffy to me. I can sort of go along with it for a while, but it might be misleading.
Yeah, so I'm using printing as a shorthand to say it is an informational entity possessing informational causal access to the composition of some other informational entity. So it's something that exists and it has something about it. So there's some information there. DNA, it's a molecule that's got shapes and behaviors, and it's in an order with other molecules. And then based on the information it has, it causes other phenomena in the universe to be a certain way. And so in that sense, it's printing a behavior, but printing a phenotype.
Okay. I don't really like it, but I can sort of go along with it. I mean, you could go the complete opposite way and say that the phenotype prints the DNA.
Exactly.
The DNA is the blueprint for the phenotype, but it is circular, right? I mean, these things the DNA doesn't mean anything without the replicating machinery, and the replicating machinery is driven by the DNA. So, but anyway, exactly. I mean, like the higher level, the way I think about it, just to give you a different metaphor, is that within a flow of energy, you get eddies, you get circularities. Life is kind of like turbulence in a flow of energy. It is little circularities that once they emerge, they perpetuate themselves, right? So it doesn't even have to include DNA. It just has to include these this cycle of reproduction. So it's really the cycle of reproduction that sets biology apart from physics, and it's the cycle of reproduction that basically adds function or value to the universe, right? So at the physical level, there are causes and effects, but there are no purposes, there are no functions. Although in some cases you can sort of metaphorically view certain physical phenomena as having purposes. But
I think you're going to find the purpose originating in your brain.
Well, you're always going to find that in a way, because it's always the effect of a model, right? But I'm saying that, well, I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent. There are kinds of very weak purposes in physics where you have things that tend toward an end. Like if you have convergent rather than divergent behavior, you can sort of think of that as sort of teleological. But forms that have functions really emerge with biology, and they emerge out of the cycle of reproduction, because the cycle of reproduction, because it is a cycle, it means that a cause and effect can sort of go in a circle, right? The the effect of part of the phenotype is to reproduce the phenotype.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's how function emerges in or out of physics. So anyway,
And
so it's
so
that
this, yeah,
circularity that creates the
yeah, and this is the error that I was making. This is the error that I was making 2 weeks ago when I was proposing that that there was this omnidirectional flow of information from the replicator, and it's really obvious when you look at that binary system of DNA replicase gene to DNA replicase protein, and the back and forth where you have a thing that is considered to be the gene or the replicator, the DNA replicase gene, is creating this protein, and then the protein is then creating the sequence of DNA, and it's to some degree arbitrary which one you call the replicator in that instance, because the way that the DNA replicase protein is deterministic. Like it's a deterministic consequence of the DNA replicase gene, and then the DNA replicase gene is a deterministic consequence of the DNA replicase protein. So if the protein was some other way, the gene would be some other way.
right, and all of life is like that. In
Yeah,
fact, I
exactly.
mean, the way to think about one way to think about life is that life emerged as autocatalytic sets of molecules. So basically, if you have enough molecules that can catalyze reactions, then eventually you'll get a circularity by which the set of molecules catalyzes all the molecules in the set out of whatever materials exist in the environment. And once you have that autocatalytic set, you have life. You have at least metabolism, right? And the replication of that is, it's part of that, but you have to have that autocatalysis first, right? That's the kind of the fundamental circularity. Is that molecules can catalyze molecules. Molecules can print molecules, basically, in your terminology. Okay, so we're getting into some pretty abstract stuff. Let's just go back for a minute. You seemed mad, let's say. You seemed not to like the video. You made a lot of comments. Do you want to?
Everyone I talk to online thinks that I'm mad when I'm making
Well, it's okay. You
comments.
could be. You could be. You don't have to be mad. It could be just you're very excited. I don't know. Some of them seem kind of negative. I didn't really read them all because there were so many. But if you have criticisms of what I was saying in that video, what are they? I guess that would be more interesting. I mean, we could talk about the really, abstract stuff about biology and physics, but I think, well, that might take a bit longer, and I don't know if other people would really be interested in listening to it.
Yeah.
But what were, regarding that video, did you have specific criticisms?
So the major criticism I had was a criticism that I'm now stepping away from, because I had I think a wrong conception of the flow of information in society. It is genes to phenotype and then phenotype to genes, so it's not omnidirectional. But there is a thing to be said there, in that the degree of informational, the degree that a gene affects the environment, and then the environment affects the gene, or any specific gene affects the environment, or any specific aspect of the environment affects genes and reproduction, is not balanced. For instance, there's all kinds of things in the environment that won't affect your reproduction significantly. So it's degrees of information and its ability to determine the composition of other information also by degrees. But yeah, that's sort of autistic abstract stuff. I'm just rereading some of my comments.
I think you were also sort of critical of the idea of memetics or something like that, or maybe I'm thinking of someone else.
I do comment on memetics quite a bit, because I think memetics is is basically bullshit. Do you have a position on memetics?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I certainly believe that culture evolves in basically the same way, by the same process. It's obviously not exactly the same as the way, DNA-based life forms replicate and all that stuff. But ideas propagate from mind to mind, and ideas, they vary, right? As they're not copied perfectly.
Yep.
An idea in one person's mind is different from another's. And so you have, variation or mutation. You have the capacity to reproduce to excess, right? Like you don't just copy the mind from one, you don't copy an idea from one mind to another. It can propagate from one mind to many minds or to no minds. So you have excess reproduction, you have variation, and you have selection. And under those conditions, you have evolution. And I think you can explain a lot of the properties of ideas and sort of cultural packages like ideologies in terms of memetic evolution. So in other words, in terms of their ability to propagate, right? I think if you look at things like internet memes or ideologies, you will see that they become selected for their ability to propagate, and this has predictive power. That they all have similar patterns. They function in similar ways. They have properties that, like, for example, most ideologies cause people to put less effort into reproduction or other aspects of life, and they basically tell them to focus on propagating the ideas, right? And they say that if we convince everyone of this religion or this ideology, then the world will be a utopia. Right? If we convince everybody to be a communist or a feminist or a MGTOW or alt-right or whatever, then we save the world, then we get the big payoff. So They have these properties that make perfect sense if you view them as replicators that have been selected to replicate like viruses, right? To use other bodies, or use organisms as a way to replicate their information. So I do think memetics makes a lot of sense. I also think technology evolves. Like not all memes are parasitic, obviously. Some are beneficial. But the beneficial ones also evolve. They go through an evolutionary process. Like most technologies, no one actually designed them. Right? They have this complex structure that nobody actually designed, but that emerged over a long period of time because variations were added, and the variations that turned out to be economically successful or they appealed to people emotionally were selected for, and those that didn't were selected against. And so over a long period of time, you get, the evolution of technology. So yeah,
you've introduced the exact concept, appealing to people emotionally. So that's the exact concept, which is sort of the flaw of memetics. So you haven't said it specifically in your description of memetics that you've given just now. So I'll ask it directly. Do you think that the status of memetics as an evolving entity is on par with or parallel to replication of genes, or do you think that it's a subordinate replicator?
Well, I don't know what you mean by subordinate. It is a replicator. Ideas replicate. So you can think of them as as replicators, right? I mean, again, these things are sort of metaphorical. Like also for genes. Genes don't actually do anything, right? They're inert molecules.
No, they are doing stuff. They've got crazy electron clouds. They can wiggle a little bit in fluid, and that's pretty well all any molecule is doing anyway. So
right, yeah. But I'm saying that when you talk about them as a replicator, you're leaving out a lot of details, like the whole complex process by which the phenotype replicates, and all that replicates is the information, not the thing itself. But anyway, it's not an important point, I guess. I think they are replicators. I don't know what you mean by subordinate. Obviously, they depend on brains, right? So
yeah.
but so do viruses. So viruses are subordinate replicators because without non-viral cells, viruses can't replicate. Yet I don't think anybody would deny that viruses are replicators and that they evolve. So I don't see why you would deny that for memes.
So it's the fundamental thing where a meme can't. So there are some viruses that I would say aren't evolving for themselves, and these are viruses that don't have their own polymerase or replicase gene. So if the virus isn't capable of if it doesn't have that behavior, then it
but it has the effect of creating more copies of itself in a certain environment, right? Like if it gets into the environment of a body, it has the effect of creating more copies of itself. And the same thing is true of a meme. If an idea gets into a certain kind of brain, then it will have the effect of creating more copies of itself.
But it's contingent on there being this body that it can get inside of.
Well, yes, but I mean, so what? Life is contingent on, like your life is contingent on oxygen being in the atmosphere. I mean, every life form is contingent on an environment.
Yeah, but specifically, the memes are contingent on the brains and contingent on the DNA. The DNA is also contingent on a certain energy density in the universe that allows for the existence of atoms. And so, to some degree, DNA is also subordinate to atoms, to some degree. And
well,
so
it's not
in the
just
same way,
DNA. I mean, it's the information in the DNA, right? It's really the information about the phenotype. I mean, we're not just replicating DNA, period. We're replicating specific patterns of specific sequences of nucleotides along with a system of molecules that then is capable of, copying those strands and also generating the phenotype. So really, I think it makes more sense to think about the form of the phenotype as the thing that replicates and not just DNA.
Yeah, okay, that's probably my background where I'm autistically focused on DNA. Okay. So I'll say the person instead, that the idea is contingent on a person that is a certain way.
I mean, obviously the ideas to propagate have to plug into a certain kind of brain, and the brain then has to be motivated to propagate the ideas. But that's just like a virus has to plug into a certain kind of cell so that it can inject DNA into the cell. I mean, I don't see any distinct. I obviously see a distinction. One's physical and the other's mental, but I think they both are replicators. What's being replicated is information in both cases, right?
So the sort of outlier extreme argument for me that demonstrates that ideas are subordinate to the existence of the people that carry them is that the ideas will never evolve towards the suicide of their carrier. And if they do, which obviously they do in some context, that is a phenotype, if you will, for the meme that will not persist.
Well, it may not persist, but evolution doesn't require infinite persistence, right? And I mean, evolution occurs even in your body, eventually you will get cancer. And that's evolution in your body. That's evolution selecting for selfish replicators among your cells.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
And they will never make it into the, beyond your body, but that doesn't prevent them from evolving in your body and destroying it. Diseases can wipe out their carriers. That nothing really prevents them from evolving to do that because they're selected to propagate in the short term, right? There isn't some teleology built into this where, the gene is looking ahead with, 20/20 vision into the infinite future of the universe and saying, I'll only do something if I get to exist forever. I mean, it just if it replicates, it replicates. If it increases in frequency, it increases in frequency. And then if eventually that results in a catastrophic decline, destruction of the carrier population and the extinction of the disease or the meme or whatever, well, that can't be foreseen by that process, right? It just runs to completion. And I think something like that is happening. Like, I think the meme of not having children is not going to wipe out the human species, but it's running through the population, and it's preventing reproduction. So it's basically having this huge negative effect on the people's reproductive fitness, on the reproductive fitness of the carriers, but that doesn't matter to the meme because it propagates. It doesn't propagate from them to their children. It propagates laterally from one person to another, like a fashion. And I've talked about this before, that some memes propagate down lines of descent. Like, if memes that parents teach to their children tend to reinforce reproduction because they propagate via reproduction. That's why traditions are sort of, friendly to genes, but fashions can be antagonistic to genes because fashions spread laterally. So they don't really care if you reproduce. What they care about is that you do something to copy them into the minds of others.
So do you consider the resistance to accepting some memes could be an evolved trait in humans at a level other than memetics, e.g. that brains could be built in a way, like in the womb and then during adolescent development, independently of exposure to ideas that will make the person more likely to accept or reject certain ideas?
Well, I think people, I think brains, different brains accept or reject different ideas for sure. But I think we probably have a kind of somewhat protective, it's almost, okay, it's hard to distinguish protective versus just a useful heuristic. Like, basically people's minds tend to become frozen in early adulthood. Like, they don't change their minds very much after early adulthood. And that's probably a pretty good heuristic, right? Because if you haven't learned it then, there's not much point learning anything after early adulthood. And I think there are people who are very resistant to fashions in general. They're very conservative. And that can be a very useful heuristic, but in some cases it can be very bad. Like, it can prevent you from adopting a new technology that's very useful. So, there's no simple answer to that, but I think, I'm not really sure what you're saying. Our brains are not adapted to be like totally open-minded and think about everything. And, we are sort of closed-minded, and that's not necessarily maladaptive.
So, for an example, you could think of lots of behaviors that are single behaviors that you could do or not do that will have massive reproductive consequences, like all these trans people in getting operations to basically castrate themselves.
Yeah,
that kind of behavior won't exist in the future because of the consequence that this idea is having on the reproduction of the people who accept the idea. And so I make the prediction that in the future, if exposure to this idea, for instance, was, if every person on the planet was exposed to this idea of, hey, maybe you should chemically castrate yourself, then in 100 years or 1,000 years, there will be no person on Earth receptive to that idea.
Yeah, I think that's true. That's an example of culture affecting biology, right? Like, if it becomes culturally popular to chemically castrate yourself, or just to use birth control pills, people who are somehow resistant to that meme for whatever reason, maybe because they're religious conservatives, maybe because they're contrarians, or maybe because they're super smart, maybe because they're super dumb, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, whatever biological traits protect you from that meme will obviously be selected for, because that's obviously a pretty bad, like, that meme has some pretty negative effects on reproduction, obviously, right? So anything like that is going to have an effect on the phenotype in the future, which is something I talk about. For that, like that low fertility is not some stable state. We're not going to go through a demographic transition and then, be permanently low fertility. That whatever makes people, like if we maintain conditions of prosperity long enough, then fertility will rise without limit, basically, until it reaches the maximum that humans are capable of.
Yeah, and then it'll be a question of where this resistance to chemical castration is encoded. Is it encoded in another meme that is perpetuated cyclically within a sort of closed intellectual environment where you just don't listen to anyone who shows up in your town with blue hair, or whether it's a gene that encodes for fear of bright blue colors, or
Yeah, it could be memetic or genetic, and it might be both. Like the Amish are reproducing quite rapidly, and that's partly biological and partly memetic. Chances are, for most of these things, we're going to have, it's going to be a fight between traditions and fashions. And the traditions will win in the long run. And so, like, you don't just inherit genes from your parents, you inherit memes as well. And if you get a protective meme from your parents that protects you from this, this kind of craziness, like if you have a meme from your parents that says you should reproduce, that's important. That's, important aspect of life. You should have a family. You should have children. If you get that in any form, whether it's religious or not religious, doesn't really matter. If you get that meme from your parents and it sticks in you, then you will be protected, right? So we're going to have, both kinds of memetic evolution going on at the same time. We're going to have memes that are aligned with genes evolving to protect the genes, and we're going to have memes that are parasitic on genes evolving to, to be parasites.
So that's really the model that I have for memes, is that they can evolve to be favorable towards, I guess, the genes, but the person. So the meme can be favorable to the reproduction of the person, or it can disfavor the reproduction of the person. And so that is why I view the meme to be subordinate.
Well, I mean, that's fine. I mean, you can call it subordinate, but it still evolves, and it's still, you can still have parasitic memes evolving that, persist for fairly long periods of time, because just like diseases can persist for fairly long periods of time, replicating from one population to another, and the population builds up resistance, but then they find another population, or they come back in a slightly modified form, right? So I wouldn't, like, if you think that parasitic memes just can't exist, that's not true. Or at least I would strongly, I'll argue against that.
They can definitely exist in the same way that parasitic, some viruses that aren't themselves, that they don't direct their own copying. They're just, like, you can get viruses as simple as a single gene that just makes its own co-protein. But these viruses that don't have control of their own replication can have stuff inserted into them by whatever is copying them, and so they only perpetuate to the extent that the thing copying them continues to acquiesce with copying them, and they have no ability to enforce copying by the polymerase gene or whatever it is that's making more copies of the virus.
Well, yeah, but I don't think that distinction is really that important, because if the virus in that environment replicates, then it's a replicator. Even if something else is doing the replication, I don't see that that's really an important distinction. There was something else I wanted to say about the memes, though. Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that just like we have parasitic or, I don't know what the infectious bacteria, like bacteria that cause disease or that kind of parasitize us and cause negative consequences for us. And we have bacteria that evolve to be symbiotic with us. I think that's the best way to think about memes, that we're always infested with them, right? We're full of memes, just like we're full of bacteria. Some of them are kind of on our side, and some of them are working against us, or exploiting us in a sense. And they can evolve to do both things.
Yeah, exploiting us. So you can
using
be
us as an energy source to replicate themselves at a cost to us, right? So basically reducing our fitness, so replicating at our expense. That's what I mean by a parasite or a disease.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think harmful memes exist and do that and exploit people. But I don't consider that. So if the memes can't enforce their existence and they're dependent on something else to keep copying them, then they have to some degree, support the existence of the thing that copies them, because then just by chance.
Well, no, but I mean not necessarily, right? I mean, if they don't fully wipe out the population, they can exist at a low level. Or, like I was saying, they can keep coming back in a mutated form, just like the influenza virus, right? It doesn't kill us, it doesn't wipe us out, it doesn't help us. It reproduces at our expense. But we never get fully wiped out by it, and we never fully become resistant to it, and it just goes on in this perpetual state. Just like predators coexist with prey, right? So I don't think you can assume that a meme that is negative will ultimately get wiped out.
Okay, yeah. I think you might be right.
Wow, somebody's agreeing with me. It's my lucky day. I don't know if you know, Meat Machine was sort of converted away from theism, I guess, so I must be on a roll.
Did he come to you with that, or did you?
Well, you haven't been in this little circle for a while, but he came to me. He started a fight with me on a video a long time ago that didn't even really make sense. It's kind of like actually your comments, because I didn't even really understand what he was saying. To me, it didn't make any sense because I didn't really get where he was coming from. And what he really wanted to argue about was atheism versus theism. So we got into this big, long, kind of drawn out philosophical discussion / argument over atheism and theism. And I guess I finally won, I guess. So.
Yeah, that's really stupid. If people are theists, they should just let themselves be theists. I don't think
he was very he was very philosophical about it. He wasn't somebody who was born into religion and then he was you'd have to understand the backstory. It's hard to explain, but he was really interested in the philosophy, so he wanted to debate philosophy. But anyways, all right. Well, so, I actually have. Oh, sorry. You could.
I just a last comment about the religion thing. As someone who's an atheist and has always been an atheist, I'm envious of religious people and their theism, because I think that life would be generally of a higher quality if I had some kind of religious conviction. But if a religious person's coming to you proselytizing, then just crush their ideas and let's get rid of this proselytization in theists.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I see religion these days as not really having a useful function. I think it has outlived its purpose. I think the rate of cultural evolution has accelerated because of modernity, and it's like we have to stop. We just have to get rid of these things that are preventing us from adapting to our own creations, right? Like we're creating technology, like the market economics and science create this accelerated pace of cultural and social change, but then we have these institutions like religion that can only evolve very slowly, if at all, and they're not keeping up. Like that's the problem. Our morality, our religion, our understanding of society, all of those things, our understanding of ourselves, it's all lagging way behind, and it just doesn't work. So I think we need to crush religion. I don't see it as being beneficial at all. It might be beneficial to certain people, but it's leading us to ruin. It's not helping us. Anyway, I do have to go make dinner, so, and I do schedule things. So if you want to talk to me again, let's actually schedule a time, because then I can, prepare for it. Because I actually have to talk to somebody in half an hour, and I got to grab something to eat.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll do that in future. It was good talking to you.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I'm glad. I'm glad you weren't mad. I don't know. Well, I guess it's actually kind of fun to have those heated debates, but this is fine too. All right, man. I'll talk to you later.
See ya.